We are going to build currency converter application using React and Node.js. And this is used to convert between two currencies. For example, from USD to Ghana cedis. And if I want to convert 1 USD, let's see the rate. And by the time of recording this video, this is the rate and this is the converted amount, which means that 1 USD is equivalent to 13 Ghana cedis. And if I want to convert to this currency, this is the rate, which means that 1 USD is equivalent to this one, and then this is the converted amount. And we can extend this project to include more currencies, and I will show you as we go through this project. And for this project, we are going to use an API from Exchange Rate API. And if you click on the documentation, let's see how you're going to use this. Under the API endpoint, we have this endpoint: per conversion, enriched data, historical, supported, and others. We are going to use the per conversion, so click on that. All what we need is our API key and the two currencies that we want to make the conversion. And then this is the endpoint that we are going to hit. And to know more about the currencies that this API supports, click on the codes we support. And here we have the unsupported currencies, which are these ones. If you scroll down here, these are the supported currencies. So we can include these ones in our application, but for me, I have simplified it to use these ones. Alright, so next step is that make sure to have an API key which is free of charge. Now if you go to home page, here all what you need is to provide your email address and they will send you your API keys. Assuming that you have your API keys, then let's get into it. And for front end, we are going to use Vite to generate our React application. So let's begin with the backend. Let's get back to VS Code, and in case you want to have the exact theme as I'm using, let me show you the extension that I'm using. The extension is called, let me type it here as Tenacious, which is this one. And I have some cool extensions that you may have interest with. For example, Better Comment. This is going to help us to style our comments by giving different colors, and Code Spell Checker to avoid spelling mistakes as you move on. And then year 7, the icons is Helium icon. And you need to have an extension called Tender Client, which is this one. And this is going to help us to test our API. Before we get into it, let me give you the flow for this project. At this point, you may be asking that, well, we can directly call the API from our React application. And the answer is yes, of course, you can do that. But why do we need backend like Node.js? And the answer is that, let's say you want to improve this application by implementing some logics like logging in or authentication, and that is unless a user is logged in before accessing this application, then you need to have your own backend. And also, let's say you want to implement subscription or payment before using this application, you need your own backend. And having your own backend, it will help you to avoid what is called course error. Not all APIs are course free, and I'll show you as we move on in this project. And also, it will help you to understand how you can utilize Node.js to build application using third-party APIs. So let's get into it. So over here, I have already created a folder called Currency Converter. I'm going to have one folder called Backend. And let's begin with this one before getting into React. So I'm going to have one file called app.js. And let's initialize our project as npm by using npm init -- yes, This one gives us the default configuration, and we have our package.json file. Let's rename the main as app, because that is what we specified here as app. And let's install the packages we need for this project. We will need Express for our server, and then Axios as our HTTP client, and CORS to prevent CORS error. And we're going to use Express rate limit. I'll explain to you when we get into the implementation. And then .env to be able to access our environment variables. Alright, let's continue with the server. Let's import or require Express as Express, and then let's have the port as process.env.port. In case you don't have one, I'm going to use 5000. And then instance of app as app is equal to Express as a function call. And then down here, I'm going to use start the server. I'm having this color for my comment because of the extension called beta comment. And I see some underline here, meaning that I made some typing mistake. And this is possible because of the extension called code spell checker. Alright, so down here, I'm going to start the server as app.listen, and then pass in the port, and then callback function. And I'm going to have the middlewares up here. And the first middleware is to use app.use, and then pass in express.json. And this middleware will pass the incoming JSON data from the user. And then let's require the Express rate limit. Alright, the purpose for this one is that it will help us to avoid unnecessary requests from the same user within some short possible time, because for the API, sometimes it has some quota, and that is number of requests that you can make. And a user can make unlimited requests within some minutes. So this middleware is going to help us to avoid that. All what we need is to plug in as app.use, and then pass in the, let me create instance of the rate here as, which is equal to the rate limit function call, and then the object. And the first property is called window ms. We are going to limit this one for 15 minutes. And the value here is going to be 15 multiplied by 60, and then multiplied by 1000. After that, we're going to have the maximum or max. This means that we are going to limit each IP to 100 requests per window. So here as that, and then I'm going to plug in here as API limiter. All right, we are done with that. Let me change this one to uppercase. This is just a naming convention. And let's go ahead and create our route. I will say conversion router. We are going to write everything on one file as app.post. And then the path here, I'm going to specify as API/convert. You can name it whatever you want. And then async. Then the callback function as that. And let's bring in try and catch. Let's make sure that what the user is passing is being accessible in our route here. So I will say, and it can be found on the request body. I will say data is equal to rec.body. And let me log the body here, or just the data here. And let's start our server. And to start it, we're going to use a new feature in Node.js as node-watch, and then the name of our file. In this case, it is called app.js. And with this one, we don't need node MERN again to automatically restart our server. Now, let's hit enter. I have an error. The issue here is that we have messed up with the folder structure. We have to place all these ones inside the backend folder. We made some mistake when we were initializing the project. So let me place everything inside that. If I collapse, there we go. I have it as that. Therefore, we have to cd into the backend folder as cd backend. And now we can initiate the snippet as node -- watch, the name of the file as app, and the server is running on this port. If I make changes to the server file or my code and save, the server has been restarted. So we are good to go. Last step is we are going to integrate this API into our application. So here we will need this one. I have copied that. And now back to the project. I'm going to have a variable here as const API URL. Alright, we will find a way to restructure this one. And we will need our API key as const API-key is equal to, we are going to save it inside our environment variable, and we can access that on process.env, and I'm going to make it as exchange rate API. Therefore, we have to create the .env file inside the backend and then paste that. And this is my API key. Make sure to use your own API key. Therefore, we will need the .env package as .env, and this package will help us to automatically access the data inside the .env file. So let's get back to the app, and I can remove this one. All right, we are done with that. So let's modify the endpoint well. All what we need is up to this side. We are going to remove this one, and then these ones are going to be dynamic. So remove everything from here as that. Remember, this one requires, let me bring it back. It requires from and then to, and then the amount that we want to convert. So remove this one again. And now back here, we are going to destructure the properties as from which currency, and then to which currency, and then the amount that we want to convert. We will need Axios, so let's require Axios here. So now let's make sure that we have access to this one. So let me log as an object. And now how can we access this data? We're going to use an extension called Tender Client. So if you don't have it here, right click and then select Tender Client, which is this. And then let's make new request. The endpoint here is going to be HTTPS, supposed to be HTTP, colon the port, which is 5000. And the endpoint is API/convert, and it is post method. Let me hit send. Our server is hanging. If I check the terminal, we have them as undefined. So let's pass in the data. So under the body here, provide object and specify the properties as key value per, and they must be in double quotes. I would say from which currency. I'm going to use USD, comma, and then to which currency. I'm going to use GS, that is Ghana cedis, and then the amount. I'm going to specify 1 Ghana cedis, and if I hit send, let's check the terminal. I think unless I cancel the ongoing one, cancel, and let me try again, and we have the result down here. So we are going to pass this one to the API to make the request, and that is it. So let's get back to the implementation. So here, let me bring inside the try block here. And now let's construct the API. And it's going to be as const URL is equal to backtick $curly braces the API URL, which is this one. Remember, we have to make it in such a way that it matches this one. So it's going to be as that, and then / the API key, and then / the currency, and that is from, and then / the to currency, and then / the amount. If you check the original API, as you can see, it's supposed to be this one instead, our API key, and then from, and then the amount. We need to bring per here after the API key as per, and then / the from, and then to, and then the amount. If you log the URL, let's see. Let me get back to the Tender client, and then let me check the terminal. As you can see, this is the URL that matches the expected one. All right. So let's make the request. Let me cancel the ongoing response or request. And let's get into the app here. We are going to make the request. So here I'm going to make a request to the exchange rate API as const response is equal to await axios.get method, because that is what the API supports, and that is the get method. But in our backend, we are going to make post request. We're going to pass in the URL here, and then we're going to send the response back to the user. If you are using Axios, you're going to have the response on the response.data. In case we have one, then you're going to get the result and check for success. Well, let me show you what I mean here. Let me remove that and let's log the response. Let's try again. If I send, let's check. As you can see, we have the response from the API, and this is the conversion rate. We're going to check for success. In case we have that one, we know that our request was successful. So let's continue. Back to the route here, remove this. We're going to make a condition as if we have response.data. In case we have one, then we're going to check for the success, that is response.data.result. In case it is equal to success, then we know that we have the response. Therefore, you're going to send the JSON data back to the user as base is equal to from, and then the target to, remember we have from and to here from the user, and then let's have the conversion rate, and it can be found on the response.data.conversion_rate. If you check in the terminal, we're going to see the conversion rate. And then let's also have the converted amount, and it can be found on the conversion result. And let's send, supposed to be converted uppercase amount here. Yeah, and that is it. You can send other properties the way you want it. So else here, in case we have an error, then we're gonna send res.json and then pass in object and then message, and let's pass in more details about the error. as response.data. And then in the catch block here, in case something goes wrong from our own server, then we're going to throw or send this error. It's going to be the same thing here. So let me copy this one and then send it here. But the message can be found on error.message. All right, we are done with the API. Let's try out. If I hit send, and this is the response from the API. If I want to convert from, let's check the supported currencies. Click on this. And let's say I want to convert. Let me use any of these. For example, Canadian. And then to, let's say, China currency and send. As you can see the rate. So we are done with the API. What has left is to connect the front end into it. So let's get into the front end and let me create the folder as front end. And let me close all these instances. And we're going to use Vite to generate our React application. So click on Get Started. And this is the snippet. Copy that. Make sure to open this one in the terminal. And then paste that. And it goes like npm create Vite at latest and hit enter. And then enter. It is asking for the project name. Since we have already named it as front end, we are going to use period here and enter and select React, JavaScript, and let's use npm I to install all the packages. All right, it has finished. So let's install Axios. All right, so let's start the server as npm run dev. And copy this and open it inside our browser. And this is our React application. For this one, I'm going to give you the template for the component. And I'll show you the actual logic, how we're going to do it. So I'm going to place the template, copy that, and then in the SRC, paste that. This is the template. And I'll give you the CSS also. Copy and paste it. This is the CSS. And then this is the template. All right, so let me show you how it's going to work. I'm going to remove the original one. Remove that. And then rename the template one to app. I have made a copy. And then this is the app.js or JSX. And let's see it in the browser, and this is what we have. And the CSS has been messed up. It means that it is conflicting with the default one that came with Vite. So remove the index.css or even the code from here. And then the app.css, remove the CSS also from here. And this is what we have. Alright, so let me show you how I handle the form over here. Or you can use third-party library like Forming for the form handling. Alright, so here I have the local state, and that is from, to, and then the amount. The same way we did from the backend when making the request from the tender client. Let me show you here. Tender client. Here we passed in the data as from, to, and then the amount. We are doing the same thing in the front end as from, to, and then the amount. And these are the local state for managing the results and then the error. Let's bring in the use state here. I think I have it here already. And then these are the currencies that we are going to support. If you want to add more, you can do it by coming here and then provide these ones as that. The choice is up to you. And this is the handle change for the form. We are using dynamic property as name by spreading all the previous data, and then I'm going to update the name. and this is the submit handler. And if you look inside the form, we have the select from value and then the class name, and then from currency code, we are looping through the currencies and then display the code accordingly. And then the to currency, it follows the same format, and then the amount field, and this is where we are placing the result. In case we have the result from the state, then we're going to take that and then use the converted amount and then the conversion rate. If you look inside the backend, this is the result. And this is what we are placing them in the front end as conversion rate and then the converted amount. All right. So what is left is that we're going to make the actual request. So here, and that is inside the submit handler, this is where we're going to talk to our API. And then this is where we're going to talk to our API, and our server or backend is going to talk to the exchange rate API for the main logic. So I will say HTTP request. So in here, let's bring in try and catch. And for the try, it's going to be as const, and then the response is equal to await axios.post. The React application is going to talk to our server, in this case, this one. So copy the endpoint back to the front end and then paste that. And remember, for the post method for Axios, we have to pass in the payload. And the payload represents what the user is passing to the server, for example, from, to, and then the amount. So here I'm going to pass in the form data from our state as form data. So here as that. All right. And then here, let's log the response from the API. So let's get back to application. This one, let me close this one. This is what we are done with it. This is the original one, and this is what we are working with. So let's open the console, and then from currency, and then this amount. And here we have some beautiful error as course policy error. And this is what I made mention, that having your own backend to consume some external API is really important. This API from exchange rate has some course policy, which simply means that we are using different server or front end to access the backend from exchange rate API. And this is because the exchange rate server do not trust our front end application. So we have to avoid this, and that is a course error. This is where we installed a package called course. So if you get back to the backend, we have required the course, or we don't have it here. So let's require the course here. And this is where we are going to tell our server that, hey server, trust our front end application. I'm going to provide a comment as course configuration or course options. And it goes like this: const course options is equal to object, and then specify the origin. And the origin here is going to be array of trusted server or front end. So here we will need our front end server or front end. And in case you have already deployed your front end, you have to provide it here, and make sure to remove any /. And last step is that we're going to pass it as a middleware as app.use. And then we're going to use the course and pass in the course options as that. With this one, let's try out. Refresh, and then select, and then provide this, and let's wait. And as you can see, we got the result with a status of OK. And then if you look in the data here, we have the conversion rate from our backend. Awesome, right? So we are going to display that in our front end. So after we got the response from here, we are going to update our state. Remember, we have the result here and then the error. So here we are going to set the result by passing in the response.data. I'm using optional chaining here to avoid using AND operator. And here we know that we don't have any error, so error here is empty. And then in the catch, this is where we're going to have an error. We're going to set error and then provide error here and then comma. So in case we have error dot response, then we're going to grab or take the actual error as error dot response dot data. Else, I'm going to use the error dot message. And that is it. So let's see the differences now. If I refresh and provide this currency, and we got the result. Here ends this project.